The opinions and views expressed in the following presentation do not necessarily reflect those of GameCon Radio or its affiliates.
Moebanshee's Lair, Visionary Talk Radio on GameConRadio.com. We rock your world.
Welcome to Moebanshee's Lair, Visionary Talk Radio on GameConRadio.com. We rock your game. I hope that everybody had a good 4th of July. I know that there is a good section of the United States that has been just reeling from horrid weather conditions. South Jersey, we went on vacation, and anybody who comes to my site, asylumskate.com, you're going to know we did not stay on vacation because we lost the lights, and I was good for the first 4 or 5 days, and then I said, screw this, and I came home with my tail between my legs too. This old girl, she's not up for that stuff anymore. And when you're talking 104 degrees and all that, I just gave up. But there's a lot of the country that still is having a really hard time getting their power back up. And I can only say kudos to the guys that are out there working the lines, because I know we have guys from Jersey Central Power and Light down. They were down for 9 days in West Virginia over by the Ohio border trying to get people back on, and my daughter said it looked like a war zone had gone through. So I hope to God everybody gets their power on, and I hope everybody is safe, and I cannot stress this enough. Let me try to do this. I cannot stress this enough. When you are extremely hot, sitting in a tub of cool water can bring your body heat down. And you just leave the water in there, but you got to be careful with children and animals that they don't get in there, and then you have an accident. So, making sure even your ankles are in cool water. That means a whole world. That means a whole world of cool for you. So always, keep your wits about you. And if you think you're starting to get in trouble from heat, you probably already are. So you should always have a phone charger that works in your car, because if your power goes down, you lose the power in your phone. You don't have any way to recharge your phone. But if you've got a tank of gas in your car, you can go out and charge your phone, and you can get help, and you can find out where to go for help. So these are just little tips I hope everybody, pays attention to. It's better to have a list of places where you can go, know where you're going to be able to get ice, water, and that kind of thing. You can't wait for this stuff to happen and then you're lost. You haven't got anything. I always tell people, have a bug out room. Have like a closet where you keep your animals' crates, your animals' medicine. You have the things, papers that are important for you in case you got to get out of Dodge early. You're not running from one room for one thing to another room for another thing. Always have this stuff where you can get a hold of it fast, because tornadoes aren't going to give you warnings, and heat waves and loss of power and that kind of things, floods, this stuff doesn't always give you a warning. So please, people, be prepared. Always be prepared. Keep a couple of jugs of water in your house just in case, so that you at least have a little bit of water. Okay? Enough said. I want to welcome everybody that's listening. I want to remind everybody we have a schedule page on Game Gone Radio, and we have a lot of great shows and DJs, and there's always something going on. There's music going 24/7. There's great shows. So I hope everybody will check that out. I hate being the preacher. I don't enjoy it. And the reason I don't enjoy it is because people look at me and say, "Oh, you're a wet blanket. You're not fun." But when I tell people cemeteries, you've got to be careful in cemeteries. Everybody wants to hunt ghosts, even though they've never done anything to deserve being hunted. Everybody wants to be a ghost hunter now, and they go into cemeteries and they wander at night and they do things. And when I say you don't understand that, there's a lot of bad things that can happen. You can go through a gopher hole. You can be bit by a snake. If you go in there at night, there's not always good people in these places hiding. Cemeteries are wonderful time capsules, and I love cemeteries because when you walk through a cemetery, you get a real feel for who was who in that town. It's a history lesson. It truly is. But this week, there was a huge tragedy in Glenwood Cemetery, and it's in Utah. A 4-year-old boy died. His family was on an outing in a historic cemetery, Glenwood Cemetery in Park City, and a 6-foot-tall headstone detached from its base had fell on him. And it took a few men to lift the headstone up. It was about 4 inches thick, weighed hundreds of pounds, and the little boy did die from head injuries. Please, people, there's a reason there are sidewalks, and there's a reason there are roads. Stick to the sidewalks, stick to the roads. Don't let your kids climb around these monuments. It's dangerous stuff. I'm hearing an echo. Okay. So it's very dangerous. A kid, you can go through a gopher hole, you can break an ankle. You've got to be careful because cemeteries, unfortunately, they're not always maintained like we think they should be. Families don't go and take care of it. They bury their family member and then nobody goes back until the next member dies. So what happens is stones become compromised. People go in and they mess around with them. They push them. They try to knock them down. This dislodges it. This breaks the cement. And terrible things can happen like this. And my sincere sympathy goes out to this child's family. I cannot imagine how this family is coping with this at this point. This is a terrible thing to happen. And I just hope everybody knows that, yes, they're wonderful places to be, but don't let your kid climb around stones. Be careful around them, please. This goes back to 2 years ago, whatever, where the young guy, he's going to be a ghost buster. He takes his whole team out into one of these trestles, and nobody thought, wow, the train's going to come through. What do we do? And what happens? He gets killed. People, you got to use your brains. This isn't game time. This is real stuff that goes on. So I hate being the preacher. I hate being the one that has to come out and say, please, what the hell is wrong with you people? But please, don't be doing this stuff. This is dangerous, dangerous stuff. Another item in the news, which I love, Al Capone's bulletproof car will be sold for, it looks like $325,000 maybe pounds. I think it's pounds. But it's up for sale, and it's a really cool, I love old cars, but there isn't a car on earth worth that kind of money. But if you could get a picture of it, it is really, it's a cool looking car, and it still has bullet holes from when he owned the car. An interesting fact about this car was during World War II, predating World War II, the president used the car because it was bulletproof. So that's pretty cool. I got crazy news, and it's a little weird. Mandates virtual pop-up store using VR goggles. Evidently, this guy in China has managed to make himself a girlfriend, a virtual girlfriend who follows him around. He used a bunch of game stuff, and however he did it, the cool thing is he doesn't have to play with himself anymore. But the really creepy thing is that, he's got this little sex slave that he hits on the head and does all kinds of weird stuff. And I posted it on Asylum's Gate if you want to go check it out. I think the guy needs to get out and meet real people. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. I'm going to bring our guest on, Dallas Tanner, an author, and I'm going to let him tell you about himself. He writes about different crypto type themes, but he does a lot of research. I mean, an extraordinary amount of fact is put into these stories that he creates. So, Dallas, welcome to the Lair.
Well, thank you, Mo. I appreciate you inviting me on. That's good lead-in information as well. I can only second what you were saying with regard to being careful and being safe. I've done a lot of heavy research, not only going to musty old libraries and abbeys and things of that nature regarding the topics I write about, but mostly out into nature with regard to the subject matter, the cryptids that I write about. It is important when I speak to eyewitnesses, because I really haven't seen a whole lot of this myself, but to also understand and appreciate the hazards that are part and parcel of the areas you go to. I spend a lot of time at the Altamaha River down below Savannah, being in South Carolina myself, down in Georgia. And the interesting thing about the altamaha, it is called the American Amazon. It has alligators, it has pink dolphins, manatee, sturgeon, and something else that we'll talk about a bit later. But it's not a very safe or comfortable place to be, as beautiful as it happens to be, and always respect the areas you're going into. And with regard to ghost hunting, haven't done a lot of it. Have had some stuff brought to me that I'll talk about a bit later as well. But you're usually talking about areas that are pretty dilapidated and have a history of just decay and ruin in addition to the tragedy. But just to kind of introduce myself, I guess really the best way to describe it, you did perfectly. I'm first and foremost a researcher. And a lot of people would happen to say that I was more or less someone who's looking to educate as well as entertain. I'm the author of the Cryptids trilogy, which consists of 3 massive books. Think Terry Goodkind and write Cryptofiction. That's pretty well me. My books push 200 to 250,000 words, and 2.5 times the size of anything that most sane people would write, especially in this digital age with the Kindle and digital publishing. Mm-hmm. But I wrote, first of all, the Shadow of the Thunderbird, which I think remains to date the only Thunderbird novel out there. Tracking the Bigfoot was the second. And the third volume, the last volume that actually involves the Altamaha River, is Wake of the Lake Monster. The interesting thing about these is I began with an indigenous people that in their totem, their shamanistic society, they more or less deified these creatures. So I talked about the Anasazi in the first book and what happened at Mesa Verde and why the people disappeared out of Chaco Core, and on Tracking the Bigfoot about the Salish Indians and the tribe that they called the Angry Brothers and why they bound their own heads up to look more like them. And in Wake of the Lake Monster, because I really didn't want to go after Champion Loch Ness, although I've been to those areas, Ogopogo. A good friend of mine, Lee Murphy, had already written about Nautaka. I wanted to pick one that would kind of solidify what I had gotten into cryptozoology about in the first place, which was there was a lot of talk saying that nothing of a cryptozoological interest would actually occurs in the American Southeast, which I think I've pretty well changed that theory and philosophy. I'm good friends with Liston Truesdale, the sheriff of Bishopville, and something called Lizard Man, and did a lot of research on that and learned that I did at least come to a conclusion that he agreed with as to the species of the thing. But I've been doing this for probably, again, about 10 years. I began with one publisher, went out on my own independent, formed the Trilogist Media Group, where I do books and film and music. I'm an accomplished musician. It's where I started years and years ago. But I've been working at this thing, like I said, about a decade. I have a background in radio, as you do here. Artists First, Bigfoot Central, Paranormal Airwaves. And I spent 2 years as one of the, I guess you'd call it the subject matter experts of the Animal Planet series Lost Tapes, which I think has mutated into another show where they don't need the assistance of me or any of my colleagues. But I still go to high schools and colleges and even middle schools and elementary schools to talk about myths and legends. But I think that probably pretty well sums up what I've done, and that is the short version. But hopefully it'll give us enough to work with over the next hour and a half or so.
Yeah, you said you make the wires sing on the internet, so I'm not sure what that means. And you also own a publishing company, right? So.
Yeah, I do. I work as an e-commerce specialist. I have actually a very sizable office. On one side, I've got a computer that I use to do electronic commerce, which is basically anything you would do in a paper transaction, be it an order or an invoice or a shipping document. I convert it into bits and bytes. I do electronic funds transfers. I work with major corporations, but for the most part these days I don't have to travel to do it. They bring me projects and I work from home. And on the other, of course, I've got the work that I do in actually, like I said, books, the ones that I've written. I actually wrote another novel called The Shroud that we'll talk about that was absolutely massive, but nobody can generally argue with my research because of the amount that I put in. And the latest even has to do with who wrote the works of Shakespeare, and I believe that I've discovered, much to my surprise and those of others, that it wasn't Shakespeare himself who actually wrote it, but a number of different projects that I work on, a number of different things that I do. But when I say I make the wire sing, I convert paper into electronic bytes so that we don't have to kill any perfectly good trees or club any shrubbery. I turn things into electronic data, and it gets passed around the world. But I've been doing that to kind of pay for some of these other hobbies that are turning into more and more as I go later in life a profitable enough business that I can devote more and more time to it.
Let me ask you, the first group of books you did was the cryptozoology trilogy, right?
Yes.
What turned you on to it? Did you say, did it start that you did the research, or did you say, I'm going to write a book about it, and then decided, well, I better learn about it? I mean, how did it all come about?
Well, it's funny you should ask. Basically, I wanted to put someone in the situation that I was in. When about 15 years ago, I left home really for the first time to travel on the road as a consultant for a large corporation. I found that I had all the technical and intellectual ability with my job, but I was kind of lost in the world. I didn't do a lot of traveling at that point. Didn't know much about exchange rates when I went to foreign countries, and had to keep and be mindful of whether I drive on the left or right-hand side of the road, and basically how to make reservations, do expenses, find my way around in a country where they don't speak the language quite the way we do. Mm-hmm. And so I've got a alter ego, as a lot of authors would use, named Ian McQuaid, who is a failed PhD candidate. And he's somebody who really knows his subject matter, but really doesn't have a clue about getting out in the world. So he happens to be in the Amazon looking for a spider that would help to prove some of his theories, and happens to end up being rescued by a cartographer that lives down there, who is actually, she's smarter than he is, but it's somebody that has the ability to get themselves out of any kind of situation. Is very well versed in local culture and whatnot, but it's a combination of a plot and a storyline in my novels. Generally, you're going to pick one or the other. A storyline would be like a fairy tale where the situations don't change, but the character does to overcome it. And in a plot, it'd be like a murder mystery where the situation itself changed, but the character doesn't, so you can find out who's pretending to be something they're not. And I like to blend the two, which kind of lends itself to a much longer story, I found. But I try as much to educate as to entertain, and I look for a species of animal that if it didn't die out after the last ice age, let's say after the Mesozoic, when most of these larger animals, the megafauna, first appeared, what animal would account for it? The interesting thing is, in all three of these books, I'm actually leaning toward a particular species of prototypical human or beast that could account for the myths and legends, the historical accounts, the eyewitness reports, and basically the myths and legends that transfer themselves from the indigenous people that live in an area to, let's say, the people who come in and settle the area. They adopt those myths and legends. Case in point, with all of the inflow of people from Mexico, there are more and more reports now of chupacabra, and even sightings of what they consider the beast to be. And that travels from not only the area of Texas, the Panhandle, and Arkansas, and through the southeast, but as far north, you get reports occasionally of even chupacabra sightings in your area because of the culture of the people who have brought that north with them.
Yeah, it's like they know that, so when they see, we're getting a lot of coyotes, but I notice since the coyotes are starting to migrate more and more into New Jersey, we have a lot of Spanish people because obviously New York City and this is where a great influx from Puerto Rico come in. You're hearing about chupacabra all of a sudden, and I'm like, we got coyotes, guys. Calm down, everybody take a step back. It's not a monster. But then you get that Montauk beast that the kids bludgeoned to death, which in my opinion was a zoo animal somebody had and let loose and had fungus on it. What is it?
Like mange
a sloth.
Or something.
Yeah, a sloth. That's exactly what it looks like to me. A sloth that had mange and somebody couldn't keep it anymore. They let it loose and somehow it got down there and the kids beat it to death. But I do believe that a lot of it is misidentification, but people will always go back to their roots and what they were taught, is running around, right?
Right, absolutely. And some of the footage they've shown, and even this woman who brought a severed head out of a freezer, I keep up with these people around the country. But let me just kind of give you an example. I wrote a novella called Chupacabra that when it went free on Amazon, 8,000 copies were downloaded in 3 days now. Granted, it's 30,000 words being a novella. That's a bit long for a novella, but it's very, very short for me. But I write about something that would be more the traditional chupacabra with regard to something that you don't know whether it's genetically engineered, a military experiment, a Mayan semi-deity, or even an alien from outer space. It's the way that I wrote it, but in the research that I did on the chupacabra, what I discovered was there was, back in the days when the Mayan Empire, what they would do is they would have blood offerings and for lack of a better term, dismember or take the beating heart out of warriors. Mm-hmm. They actually bred three species. Well, within one species, three types of dogs called a Zolo, and the Zolo was the god of the underworld. These dogs were bred, depending on their size, to lap up the blood of the warriors and to lead their souls into the underworld. That's what these dogs are bred to do. Now, the thing is, the Zolo, the larger one, looks a bit like a long-nosed, well, to me it looks more like an alligator, but it looks like a pit bull with the face of an alligator, and the Zolo has been brought with this influx into Texas and Arkansas and Arizona and New Mexico, and several of these, as you say, have been misidentified as chupacabra, but to be honest with you, that's probably what the chupacabra actually it is. It was bred to lap up blood, to lead the souls of the defeated and sacrificed warriors to the underworld, But it is a real breed of dog, and the larger one, you can look it up. I believe, I can't recall whether it's ZOLO or XOLO, but that is the animal, more often than not, that they call the chupacabra, and it actually is the one that that fostered the legend, especially out of the Mayan culture and more or less the Hispanic, I guess, legends, the myths around it. But it's interesting stuff. But I always go back to look for the root of these things. And even the animals I write about, there was a bird. I don't really espouse the theory that the ropin and some of these other birds, the cotamanga, basically anything that would be reptilian. There was actually a feather-bearing bird that was 6 feet tall, 11 feet from beak to tail, and had a 25-foot wingspan, and actually hunted saber-toothed cat, which it dragged to great heights and dropped and broke on the stone and ate. And it died out 40 million years ago, but if it had not died out, that would be one impressive candidate for what the Anasazi and southwestern cultures believe was the thunderbird.
Right. Your research, and I was going to ask you about the thunderbird. Nice switch over. Have you come across stories with people who have said they've seen this?
Actually, I tend to be a bit of a repository for all these kinds of stories out of different parts of the world, because
I know the feeling.
Yeah, I get it a lot. But to tell you real quickly, I know we're coming up on the half hour here, but 6 months after the publication of Shadow of the Thunderbird, I was contacted by a man who was pretty distraught on the phone. He said, "Would you mind if I called you back later in the evening?" He said he was at work. But as it came about, he worked at a high school outside Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, and he'd gotten off I-76 and had gone to a T intersection that led into the school, and they were, of course, parents dropping off, picking up, taking the children for the day's classes, and he said he was toward the front of the line in his Dodge Durango, and he said there's a hedgerow that fronted this T intersection, and a small Quonset where they had the weed whackers and the push mowers and things, the hedge trimmers, and he said that a man, or what he took to be a man, stepped out between two portions of the hedge. He said, "At least I thought it was a man until the first talon hit the ground." And he said, and it stepped out in the road, and he said, what I was looking at was something I'd never seen before. He said it was, he described it as a cross between a pigeon and a penguin, and that it had delta-shaped wings that went up and straight down. They were black, oily, blue reflective, very close feathers. But he said this thing just walked around more or less in a circle. 3/4 of the body was parallel to the ground, and it kind of bobbed its head as it moved forward. Then it turned and looked through the windshield of his Durango, and he said, this truck is pretty high off the ground. This thing was looking straight at me. And he said, I asked him if he was pretty well alone or if there were many more people. He said there had to have been 30 to 40 people sitting there in their cars, and for the space of 2 traffic lights, they watched this thing just going around in a circle. And this was back in 2002, so it wasn't the days of the camera phone, anything like that.
Right.
But he said eventually it just extended these great wings, gave a flap, and wheeled over the trees. And from that time forward, he tried over the course of the morning before he called me to get a hold of and speak with someone at the University of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia Zoo, and the news station about what it was that he saw, because nobody could tell him. And I interviewed this fellow not only that night, but on 3 other occasions. His story never changed over about a 5 or 6 year period. What I described as my Thunderbird was not what he saw. But the interesting thing about it is these birds, massive as they are, were what were called territorns in my belief of the definition of the thing. But you have the Gulf Stream coming up from South America all the way through the Ohio River Valley and ending in western Pennsylvania. You have the jet stream that comes across the same way. But western Pennsylvania is literally ground zero for these giant birds. And that is how I came to the attention of Lauren Coleman, because I believe that Mothman was nothing more or less than one of these giant black birds that this man described.
You know, what you're saying reminds me, you know, I live in New Jersey by the shore, you know, and we were down by Lakehurst, Experimental Naval Base, and that's where the Hindenburg went down. And you'll find that I go past there a lot. But we were going through the woodlands down there by McGuire Air Force Base and all, and there happens to be a ranger's tower there so that they can watch for pine barren fires and the like. And we're riding down the road, and to me it looked like three men kneeling in black. And, you know, of course, I'm way down the way, you know, and as I got closer, I realized they were those big vultures that you see in the old Bugs Bunny cartoons, the big, huge ones.
Right.
But the big buzzards, they were vultures with the neck that goes down and comes up, you know, with the bald head and all. They were huge. And Teddy and I, we slowed the car down. I says, I've never seen one here before, you know. So, you know, there are animals that are migrating now, and I'm happy. That means New Jersey's going to be here, at least the parts I hang out in. So we're going to go to a break. The first song we're going to play after the commercials is Home by Derek Bentley. It's a recent country song, and I hope you'll all enjoy it. I liked it very much. And when we come back, I will be telling everybody the number to call if you want to call in and ask questions. But we're talking to Dallas Tanner, author. He's got a whole slew of books up on Amazon, Shadow of the Thunderbirds, Track of Bigfoot, The Chupacabra, Wake of Lake Monster, and The Shroud. And we'll be right back. This is Game Con Radio, and we're rocking your world tonight.
Just a reminder, guys, all our talk show hosts here at GameCon Radio volunteer their time, but you can always show your appreciation. Click on the tip jar and give them a little love. I'm sure maybe your predictions will come out a little bit better. And that's how we roll here at GameCon Radio. We rock your game and your paranormal.
Your resident Beatles expert. I listen to GameCon Radio. Why? Because it's cool. I listen to it. You should too. That's GameCon Radio. I'll see you there.
Welcome back to Moebanshee's Lair Visionary Talk Radio on GameConRadio.com. I hope you enjoyed that song. Derek Bentley is the artist, and it's Home. It's a relatively new country song, and I thought I really liked it, so I hope you guys did too. Our guest is Dallas Tanner, and already we have a question, so I'm going to pose the question before I give the call-in number. And the question is, do you have any evidence of reptilian people? And I'm going to hand the floor over to you.
Well, sure thing. We were talking during the break there. Again, the reason I really got into cryptozoology and then began writing, I began writing because my father was a German science fiction novelist named Lyle Westphere, and I wanted to kind of reconnect with him. But with the research that I was doing, it was basically to prove a point because, again, someone had offhandedly made the comment that nothing of cryptozoological interest happens in the American Southeast, which I kind of took issue with. Yeah, I'm from northern Rhode Island originally, but I'm trying to turn from hillbilly redneck as quick as I can after 25 years down here. But one of the first things that I looked into after I wrote my first novel, when I was researching Track of the Bigfoot, got to know John Bindernagel, Lauren Coleman, just anybody who's anybody, and they're really sweet people. I looked into something that happened in my own state in South Carolina. In July 1988, a boy named Chris Davis, 17 years old, had taken a girl back home after a date and was actually ended up having to change a tire as he was getting back to his own residence. And it was along about midnight, and it was in a little town called Bishopville, South Carolina, which basically fronts the Straight Boar Swamp, and it's down below Columbia, South Carolina, hot, humid, swampy area. Well, he looks out across this moonlit field, and something big and dark rises up out of the sawgrass there and begins to run at him. And he knows it's very heavy because he can start hearing the sound of its feet moving, and it picks up speed, and he jumps into his car and starts driving toward his home. Well, this thing turns onto the road and not only chases after him, but catches up to the car and grabs at the handle. And it's big and it's dark, and he doesn't know anything else about it except that it's grappling at the car with him going 30, 40, upwards of 50 miles an hour trying to get away from it. And eventually, with turning and swerving, he leaves it behind. But when he gets to his residence, and again, the information I'm giving you is straight from the sheriff who took the report and worked this case. He did not put the car take the car out of gear and turn off the ignition. He just opened the door and rolled out of the car and ran into the house. He was absolutely hysterical, and it took his father the rest of the night to calm him down. And his father convinced him, well, whatever it was, whoever it was, you're safe now. Everything is okay. Maybe you weren't really going that fast. It was just the whole situation. Well, 2 weeks later, Liston Truesdale, who was the sheriff of Bishopville at the time, goes on the local news and says that in this quiet part of the country, this small town of maybe 4,500 people, there was a car under an awning in a residence. The people who live on the edge of the swamp there, living out in the country, are very much aware of the natural noises and sounds that they should hear and what they shouldn't hear. Well, they got up one morning and they went out and found that their car, which was kind of a long old model Buick, had been basically torn apart under this awning. It had been clawed. The cloth was torn away. The bumper, the hood ornament was crushed, and something had crawled into the car and would have had to have had an arm and even an opposable thumb, because it had reached up under the chassis of the car, grabbed onto the electric harness of the automobile, which is normally 15, 20 feet and usually straight out back from the engine, pulled the electrical wiring out of the car. And what he was doing was he believed that there was a possible danger to the public. He knew this was not an animal. They had taken a cruiser and they were basically circling the swamp looking for any signs of evidence. And in Liston's words, he said they came across a set of tracks that they couldn't explain. I believe they were four-toed, but he said that the cruiser, in passing over these tracks, didn't obscure them completely, which meant that as far as the compression in this loose dirt, this basically the South Carolina red clay, whatever had made that track was making a deeper impression than the tire that passed across it. I was able to see these tracks and actually hold the last surviving copy of them. But what Liston said was, if you've seen anything at all that looks unusual, that might account for such a thing, whether we got a bear or rabid dogs or whatever could cause this, please let me know. Well, this boy's father, Chris Davis's father, Chris was 17 at the time, his dad brought him over and he told him this incredible story. And Liston had seen how distraught this boy was over this whole situation, and it literally altered his personality, as I'll tell you in just a minute or two. But he took all of the information. He did the same thing he would do with anybody else regarding this case. He had Chris draw a picture of what it was he saw. He polygraphed him, he videotaped him, and he threatened him that if he was making any of this up with the public safety at risk, he would arrest him. And he came out, and the sheriff said the same thing to anybody else. Did you see anything unusual? Did you see anything if you did, and he laid out these same points, and he said, basically, if you interfere with this investigation, we're taking this deadly serious, I will arrest you, but you're going to have to do these other things for me. Eventually, 12 people came forward, drew the same thing Chris saw. They never saw his drawing. They never saw each other's drawing. They were polygraphed, and they passed the polygraph with flying colors. And the third part there, they were videotaped, and I saw portions of the footage, and these people, sometimes it was right after it happened, they drove straight there, and the people were white as sheets. Mm-hmm. And something would come out that was aggressive, and in talking with Listen Truesdale, it was called Lizard Man. And to get to the point of the question, and I'm sure the question probably referred to this, it was called Lizard Man because of the four-toed clawed prints that it left behind, but also because in the American Southeast, the Indian legends of the Nzingum, which are basically reptoid or reptilian men rumored to live in the swamp. That's why the people who lived there, from the indigenous, picked up the myths and legends that applied of the lizard man, because the rubber had been clawed, the cloth had been torn. But in approaching Liston Truesdale, after my research, I said, this thing was tall, black, hairy, narrow at the shoulder, narrow at the hip, highly reflective eyes, was very fast, very aggressive, and when it thought it had been seen or it got whatever it wanted, it grabbed hold of branches, and it was arboreal. It swung itself up into the trees. He said, yep, that's it exactly. He said nobody said that they were being chased by a crocodile running on its hind legs.
Right.
And I said it was a skunk ape. And he said, that's what they call it today. He said, but nobody wanted to listen to me. There's stories, you'll read online how the creature had been green and scaly and jumped on the hood of his car. None of that ever happened. But for those 12 individuals, some of them children in the car, this thing would reach in and grapple, and in one case, it took a child's Happy Meal, which, of all things, was very bizarre. But what happened was, Liston Truesdale said, he basically came out and told him what happened. And that poor little town that could barely survive economically, it only had one small mill, became home from July to October to over 60,000 people. And the Today Show and the fledgling CNN, all these Hollywood types, all of these celebrities, all of these monster hunters settled on their doorstep and just about destroyed the town economically. And by October, they said, well, we don't see it anymore. It's not here. And so they gradually left. A CNN film crew would come by. Animal X came by. I came by. They did an episode of Lost Tapes that I was primarily involved with. And Liston was spoken to in basically mocking terms, fact or fake, or the predecessor to it, Beyond Belief, went there basically to disparage what he had to say about it. At one point, he said he was given a hat much too small for him to make him look almost clown-like. Mm-hmm. But I asked him, I said, well, it couldn't have just wandered off. He said, I asked him, 1988, October, 3 months, 4.5 months maybe, when did you actually have the last sighting of this thing? He said, well, most of the people came forward after October. I said, Liston, when was the last time you saw this? He said, April 1993. So they were having sightings for an additional 5 years. I said, why didn't you tell anybody else about it? He said, are you kidding? After what they did to our town?
Right.
And about 2 years ago, they had a similar incident where livestock was dead, animals were dead, dogs disappeared or ran off, and the new sheriff there came back and said, oh, it was just a dog. I guarantee you they spoke with Liston and said, look, do we want to start this all over? Because I'd already been approached by a producer of one of these paranormal shows about working with him on doing another full-scale report on it. And I guarantee you, he said, we don't need to go through that again. If it's here, it's here. If it's gone, it's gone. But we don't need to tell anybody else. But Lizard Man is what they now call a skunk ape.
A skunk ape or a swamp? Yeah, they call it. Another name for it is swamp ape, right?
It is. And Dana Holyfield, who is the granddaughter of Harlan Ford, who was the man who chased after what was called the Honey Island swamp monster. They were out hunting, him and a friend, and they saw this thing, they chased after it, and then the tracks just ended. And the one thing he said that he regretted to his dying days, he said, I didn't look up into the trees. Mm-hmm. And, you know, in the Southeast, we have this thing that is not Bigfoot. It is more like what you would consider an orangutan or even a huge gibbon. It's narrow at the waist, narrow at the shoulder, very long arms, very aggressive, not afraid of people. It'll interact with people. And I did visit all the sites where these sightings occurred, including Chris Davis's sighting. And the interesting thing about these people who have these sightings, and I try to explain to people, the paranormal is life-altering. It is not something to be taken lightly, not only just because of the environment you're in, but if you do happen to run across anything in a case like that. Bigfoot, you know, Jane Goodall came on NPR back about probably 10, 12 years ago and said that she believes there were two indigenous species of great ape in the United States. You have the more gorilla-like Bigfoot that really doesn't know what to do. If it happens to be at a roadside, it's wary of man, and it doesn't seem to know what to do when it comes across traffic. Whereas the skunk ape, as we call it, that's been cited from Maryland down to
Florida.
Well, the Falcon monster in Florida and those sorts of things. It has a hellacious smell to it, so you can tell it's there. Mm-hmm. But it is a different creature entirely. And what they call Bigfoot here, you know, they try to say it's inbreeding because it's got 4 toes. It's just bred that way. It's not quite 5 fingers, not quite 5 toes. And I think we're talking about something that's less prototypical human and actually a type of great ape, which I don't believe is the case as it pertains to Bigfoot, which does have 5 fingers, 4 toes, or 5 toes, and is much more human-like in description. That's the only reason most of the hunters that I've interviewed said that they didn't shoot the thing. They believe that it was something man-like and there's an intelligence there and even a soul. And he said, I couldn't see myself shooting another human being. And he said as often as not, they would say they would let these things pass when they saw them. And they do almost take them for granted. You know, the ones that do have these sightings, they accept it and say, it's just part of life, and they go on, and they're not altered. Chris Davis was assaulted by this thing. He changed. He went from being a B student to somebody getting in trouble and died tragically involved with a drug deal in Sumter, South Carolina back about 3 or 4 years ago, and it completely changed his personality that very night, and he was never the same young man again.
Well, it's trauma. You've been something happened, and when you try to talk to somebody about it, they look at you like you're completely off your rocker. And you're talking about an entire town that basically went into hiding to try to avoid all the negative connotations that went with this. When we say the word lizard man, I'm always thinking of the old Lon Chaney Jr. movie. Remember Lizard Man, where he's the old drunk out in the swamps, and he says, "I'll get you, Lizard Man," and the guys are walking around with the crocodile heads because some scientist is doing some kind of genetic testing out there. You know, it seems more and more we're starting to put all the round pegs in more round holes. And it does say that this swamp ape, this skunk ape, because it stinks, is probably a primate, and that, you know, I don't understand why anybody would shoot it, even if it was, you know, even if you sat there and said it's an ape, why would you just shoot it, you know? So thank God they don't shoot them, and they thought of it. I just don't see any reason to shoot a Bigfoot if the only reason you're shooting it is to have some kind of evidence. To me, you ought to be shot yourself, because to me, I just don't understand that. That town, I remember that whole thing, and I remember the one woman with the car, and her whole fender had these big holes in it and stuff, and when the sheriff or somebody suggested it was some kind of a bear or something, she looked at the camera and walked in the house and said, "It ain't no bear." You know?
Absolutely.
Because really, you know, unless they're completely off off their nut, and got a hold of some bad honey. I don't even see a bear doing that to a car. Maybe rip the inside of a car apart looking for McDonald's hamburgers and stuff and fries that are spilt in there. I've seen cars completely destroyed, but just to bite through a fender, that's not normal behavior for that. So this town, about 2 years ago, you say maybe, it had the same kind of thing, but they're playing it really low. Have you gone back to try to track this thing?
I've been back on 3 or 4 occasions to visit with Liston, and I saw the original footage. He had always intended. Now Liston's retired now; he's a photographer. He's in his mid to late 70s. He has got all of the evidence, and I held the cast. I saw the photographs. I saw the pictures that they drew, and they were remarkably similar. They all had the same basic feature. And that was these almost luminous eyes. They were highly reflective eyes, very, very, and that's why I said gibbon. If you looked at a gibbon monkey that made it about 7 feet tall, you'd have a perfect picture of this thing. Now, the only person who was actually arrested out of that whole original flap in 1988 was a man who thought he saw it and was firing a gun within the city limits and town limits, and he was arrested for breaking a city ordinance, but he was the only one. But there is a lot of, again, the things that I'm talking about here, there is an indigenous legend that comes from the Native Americans who happened to live in those places at the time because of something they saw or the people who came along saw. I know we'll get more into these sorts of things as we go, but when I went out to Oklahoma back, this was probably about 2 years ago, to visit with my editor, I learned about something that I really hadn't given much thought to. From Michigan down through the Plain States, down into Oklahoma and Texas, there is more talk about what you would consider either Wendigo, Dogman, or more commonly what you would refer to as a werewolf. There's a lot of legends about that, and there's a lot of people who are as superstitious or fearful of these wolf-like creatures than even Bigfoot. And there seems to be a blending of those two kind of cryptids in north-central Texas. So it's almost like people will describe them as having a very uneasy truce. But I heard more about werewolves and Dogman and East Bray Road.
Too. Shapeshifters too.
Shapeshifting. The central story to my trilogy. You have a guy who begins as a failed PhD candidate. He gets his PhD. He becomes eventually a cryptozoologist. Then, as he really truly learns about these creatures and becomes protective of them, I've got a good friend named Tukla Neshoba who is actually a Choctaw shaman. And he taught me a lot of what I needed to know, because in the end, my character does become a shaman and learns about this, about shapeshifting and what's
your character is evolving as you evolve.
Yes. When I got to the point where I understood these things better, now it doesn't take faith anymore with the stories that I've heard, the people that I've interviewed. I've talked to dozens who were either really well known or have never been heard of before, who have passed along stories to me. And one thing I can tell you about Bigfoot is if it does not live near you, you will never find it. You will never see it. You may think you see something, but they pick an area, they pick a family, they pick basically being migratory. There is a place that they will remain throughout the warmer seasons of the year and go to another place when it's cooler. But I know people who have had decades of experiences with these things and have never told another soul about it because they don't want to disrupt just this incredible thing that they have. But the people that go hunting for it, they're really not going to find anything. And that's just a result of years and years of just hearing the people who do see it don't want anybody else to know about it. I've never broken a confidence in my life, but I do believe in the things that I write about, and I do get told a lot of stories. And I'm just grateful for it. So I never put the true name or even where it happened, but the things I relate happened to somebody within my books, and that makes it more factual to me.
Yeah, God bless people that find different creatures and find incredible things and keep their mouth shut about it. We have another question, and before I lose it, because I have to keep going back, this one's coming out of England. And it's Spooky UK is asking, it's commonly said that Nessie and other lake monsters are plesiosaurs, and these are rendered extinct over 65 million years ago. How would something be able to breed and survive undetected so long?
Well, let's put it this way. My theory is put forth in Wake of the Lake Monsters become almost universally accepted. I know we're coming up on 11 and need to take a break, but when we come back, I will talk to you about my experiences with the Altamaha River. I believe I know the identity not only of Nessie, but all of those arboreal belt lake monsters, and I've got the evidence to prove it, and I think it'll explain just what we're talking about here. So that's a great lead-in for the next block here.
Yeah, and in the 2 minutes, I'm just going to share a story that I shared before. My father's people came from Glasgow, Scotland, and my grandfather, I don't know, I must have been about 14 years ago, and there was something on TV, and he says, Nessie is real. And I looked at him and went, yeah, okay. And he says, no. He said his father had taken him on Loch Ness, and there was a small bit of ground, like a tiny, tiny little island like that was raised up out of the water. And he says, my dad took me there, and he said, I saw all these broken stones that look like pottery broken or something. And he says, Dad, what is that? And he says, that's the beastie's eggs. And he says, what? And he says, you can't tell anybody because she comes here and lays her eggs. He says, that's the beastie's eggs from years and years of laying them. And my grandfather was adamant that he saw this when he was a child over in Scotland, and he said that somehow they got in and out of the loch through some kind of underwater thing. And he says, and I says, so where exactly is this? And he says, well, I can't tell you that, because he says then somebody's going to hurt it. But he was adamant that his father showed him where the eggs were being laid. So with that, we're going to go to a break, and we're going to play. Jim Stafford is one of my all-time favorite storytellers, singers. He's Swamp Witch. I've played it before. It's a great piece. And since we're talking about creepy crawlies and swamps and all, I thought you guys would like to hear it again. So Jim Stafford, Swamp Witch, will be the next song up after the breaks. And we'll be right back with Dallas Tanner talking about cryptids. We'll be right back.
You are listening to GameCon Radio.
Yes? Hi, I'm here for the New York Ghost Tour. Sorry, we're closed. But you can come back next week. Next week? Forget that. I'll just go check out another place. Trust me, there's no place half as interesting as ours, dear. That's so not true. What about the Shanley Hotel in Napanock? Once you've been to one haunted hotel, you've been to them all. Not like this place. The Shanley Hotel dates back to 1845, and since then it's been a hotspot for paranormal activity. Mysterious music, smells, whistling, doors opening, footsteps. Almost everything you can imagine has been experienced at that hotel. It's open to the public? Absolutely. Sal and Cindy, the owners of the hotel, welcome people for regular stays or investigations, and their rates are beyond reasonable. They even offer workshops and in-house psychics. How did you learn about this place? By visiting www.shanleyhotel.com. You can get history, investigation info, and much more. Thanks, I think I will. Just don't tell any of our customers. Your secret's safe with me. It's not like anyone can hear us.
Welcome back back to Moebanshee's Lair, Visionary Talk Radio on GameConRadio.com. We are having a great discussion about cryptids, and we're answering questions too. Our guest is Dallas Tanner. I hope you enjoyed that Jim Stafford song, Swamp Witch. He is one of my favorite storytellers. He also has a show in Ohio. What is that? That place, that town up there where they have all the shows, Bobby Vinton and all them. They're all up there. Brandon, something like that up that way.
Oh, you're talking about Branson, Missouri.
Right, Branson, Missouri. There you go. That's where he's got his show. And it's a great show, and I think everybody would really, really enjoy it. So check out Jim Stafford's site, too. Great music, a lot of fun. We were just opening up about talking about Nessie, and is it even possible for something like that to regenerate, to breed unbeknownst to us? There's a lot of ocean that hasn't been explored, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, even when you're talking about the land, we live, being social creatures, we live on 10% of the landmass of the world, and scientists have even agreed we've identified about 1 million species of non-human living creatures, and beyond that, they say that we probably only discovered 10% of the creatures that live on the earth, let alone those that live in the sea. Mm-hmm. And I had an opportunity when I was writing my third novel. I was trying to find subject matter, and again, I think I mentioned about Nataka or Ogopogo that my friend Lee Murphy wrote about in his novel, and Steve Alton, a friend of mine, wrote The Loch, and he had gone basically with the original concept that he got from Lauren Coleman, who lives in Portland, Maine, runs a museum, great fellow, good friend of mine, but talking about basically oversized eels. And where that came from was a man, a combination of Dick Rayner, and you also had Dan Taylor. Dan Taylor was the man who, in 1969, you might see the footage every now and again of this small one-man sub called the Viperfish that was lowered into Loch Ness. And Dan Taylor believed that at one point in this submersible expedition that he conducted back, again, 1969 of all times and all places, he was passed by something that he called a school of large, probably 15-foot-long eels. But the problem was he couldn't go deep enough, he couldn't go fast enough to keep up with them. Now, again, talking about how a life can be changed, he came back to the United States, lived in the American Southeast, and in a place called Hardyville, spent literally the next 30 years trying to build a bigger, faster submarine. And he called this one the Nessa 2, and it had he mortgaged his mother's house to buy a 40-foot-long locomotive engine. He was deadly serious on finishing this up and being able to take it back over to Loch Ness and see if he could catch up to these creatures, whatever they were.
Right.
Well, he was close to being finished back around 2003, 2004, but it was kind of famously reported that he was denied by Scotland, the Tourist Bureau, to have the permits to be able to go back into Loch Ness with this bigger, faster sub, because he also had biopsy darts, hollow darts that he was going to fire at the creature to be able to get a sample of its hide for testing, for identification. And there was concern that he might injure Nessie.
Right.
And so here was a man who had spent literally 30 years and $750,000 to build himself this submarine, and basically he ran a restaurant with his wife, but his heart gave out, his will gave out, and he had a stroke and died. And where I more or less come into this story, I was looking for the cryptid to write about, the animal that would explain it, but the interesting thing about it was with lake monsters and things of this nature, you had to look and see, first of all, is it something that's mammalian? Is it reptilian? Is it some kind of fish? What could it be? And I wanted to avoid the subject matter that had been covered in the works of other authors that I really respect, but I have a different take on it. And what I selected was a creature that had been reported for over 500 years that locally was known as the altamaha-ha, named after the river, and it was the creature as called by the Tama Indians that lived down there. Now, this is a lesser-known tribe that lived along the banks of this river that's about 140 miles long, and it curls into kind of a nautilus shell of these three tributaries. It's below Savannah, Georgia, and there's so much history and so much culture associated with that area. There was a steam rice mill, but I studied basically this animal, not only this animal, but other animals that might account for what this creature could be, because it appeared in 15th century wood cuttings. It was in pictograms and pictographs of the Tama Indians, where they depicted it as a creature that was approximately 15 to 20 feet in length. The most noteworthy characteristic it had a trident or three-part tail. Now, they appear as spikes in the wood cuttings that were done by the Spanish who explored the coast there and went upriver themselves. But I went down to begin doing the research for my novel, and spent a week there going up and down the river and speaking with eyewitnesses. Now, the interesting thing about this, you have people who have seen these things, these that appear to go up the Altamaha River, primarily females alone to breed. They will haul themselves onto the dusty banks and roll and get themselves sunned and warmed. But there were plenty of people that could tell you exactly what it looked like and what it did. And what I was learning from them was that, yeah, it's a bit of an aggressive creature. It had a neck that would stick up out of the water. It would hiss at you. It would leave an oily slick in the water. And the qualities that it had and the experiences people had with it led me to a description that eventually contradicted a bit of a local artist who had drawn the first pictures of it. His name is Rick Spears. He's at Burbank Science Center in Atlanta. Good friend of mine, dinosaur exhibit maker, and incredible artist. If you happen to look at the little poster of what they put together for me this evening, my hand is resting on the head of the model that we made from what we saw. Let's put it this way, not saw, but what others had seen, and where they had described it as reptilian and having jagged snake-like teeth and these nictitating eyes looking like some kind of creature there. It was something that was absolutely mammalian. And not only that, but that the bones had been found unfossilized, which basically meant that this creature not only lived at one time in the area and was the primary food source for the megalodon, the giant 70-foot great white along the Pacific coast, northwest Pacific, but also the mid-Atlantic areas. But these bones are still readily found. But the people that I talked to about this creature led me to certain understandings and research that I did. First of all, and this honestly did have to do with the questions that a great fellow from England had posed. Let me tell you what I discovered 6 months to a year before National Geographic got a hold of it and applied it in a special they had. The plesiosaur, the elasmosaur, creatures like that were bottom feeders. They were scavengers. When I looked at the physiology of them, the way that their shoulder blades came together behind them, none of those creatures had the capability of raising their neck swan-like out of the water.
Really? So
you had the situation where these creatures that they talked about, the Cadborosaurus and Ogopogo and Champy and all of the others that have been reported for so long, could not be reptilian. It was none of these creatures. But if it was mammalian, as this creature was, an oil slick in the water and having these flattened teeth and eating vegetation. And the interesting thing was, when I received a book that I waited months for, and I actually did research at Lake Murray, they have a creature they called Messie, M-E-S-S-I-E. Then you have Normie at Lake Norman. Most of the southeastern lakes are man-made. They basically take a plot of land, and like they did in the movie Oh Brother, We're Out There, they just flooded it in the 1930s. And I've got a good buddy who
Right.
sold the property that became Lake Norman down here. But the Altamaha River is ancient, and there are all kinds of creatures in it.
Let me
primarily-
introduce.
Sure.
It's spelled ALTAMAHA-AA. Is that what we're talking about?
That's it. That is it.
A
And
sturgeon
I did
like animal.
Yep, I did a lot of research on it. We're talking about something mammalian, not only mammalian, but migratory. This creature, in its physiology and where it came from and what it was, began as a creature that came out of the British Isles. You have what's called the arboreal belt at that latitude that goes all the way around the world. And if you look at the major lake monster sightings, you're talking about upstate New York. You're talking about basically a lake in toward British Columbia and Washington State. And this creature, being mammalian, is not reptilian. It is absolutely migratory. If primarily what they tend to see are these large-bellied females that are going upriver to lay, to have their young. You're not talking about something that lays eggs here now. Mm-hmm. But what I'm saying about this is I won't tell you what it is because I don't give away the ending of any of my books, but it is an animal that lives today. And if you go looking, like under Google Images for the pictures of the altamaha-ha, and you find photographs, you'll more than likely find the one that is the statue that is life-size, that is perfectly characterized according to eyewitness description of what this thing is and what it looks like. 15 to 20 feet in length, and there is a man in Jacksonville, Florida, who will not tell you where he goes, but has recorded over 40 hours of footage of this creature that doesn't have hind flippers, but has a tail that, instead of being bifurcated and split like a whale, has a third part that when it is in the water, the three parts come together and form a spade. It forms a trident-shaped tail that separates, which matches perfectly the wood cuttings that came from the Spanish when they originally saw them and did pictures of them, and even the Tama Indians and the way they described their three-part tail. But this animal, I believe, accounts for the lake monster sightings not only in the American Southeast, but also Champy and Ogopogo, and I believe even Nessie, because more sightings of Nessie were made of it being out of the water than ever in the water. And one of the most famous ones, when the road around Loch Ness was first constructed, there was a couple that saw this great seal-like creature, but they didn't report hind flippers. They reported this wedge-shaped tail, which I saw in obscure copies of the original drafts of the sighting. So what we're talking about here is not a prehistoric animal at all, or eels, and you'll find that generally people who in the past had always pointed to one or the other will now talk about what amounts to the animal, the prehistoric progenitor of the modern pinniped, the seal. And it's still alive, and it has a cousin called the leopard seal that looks, except for the tail, exactly like it. Look at a leopard seal and tell me if you don't think of a great beast.
Well, the problem I'm having is any pictures of sturgeons I've seen, they don't have a separate head and neck.
This is true.
Because I have to tell you, and I'm not telling anybody the year, but it was way back in the 50s. And I was with my aunt for vacation, and we were on the eastern shore here. And we were walking along the water, and the water came up and just splashed knee-high all over us. And we looked down, and my aunt said, "What the heck?" And we looked out, and there was this huge animal that had to be 20 feet across, but it had a very long neck and a head, and it looked one way and looked another, and it just was looking, and we just stood there real still, and then it went back down. And I asked her what it was, and she said she had no idea. And, when people say, oh, it was a turtle, you saw a giant turtle. No, this wasn't that kind of head on a neck near a shell. I'm talking about probably a 2.5, 3 foot long neck up out of the water. And I saw that with my own eyes, and I will never tell anybody where I saw it because I don't want any jerks going around trying to find it and kill it. Or its babies or its great-great-great-grandbabies, whatever it is. But a lot of people describe the Loch Ness Monster as having a long neck and a head. And I've never seen a sturgeon that looks like that.
No, a sturgeon cannot raise its head out of the water like that. And you're right, because that creature lives from the eastern seaboard, Maryland, Virginia, as far south as the tip of Florida, southern tip of Florida. And what I'm saying is, when the megalodon lived, when the giant prehistoric 70-foot shark lived, this was its primary food source.
Right.
The Meg died out, this didn't. What you saw was one of these creatures. And as I said, there's a man that has 40 hours of video footage at a lake near Jacksonville where his residence is, and there are pictures of it with its head full out of the water with the 3-part tail. And Monster Quest did an episode on it, but they didn't show the more conclusive stretches of footage for it. First of all, he wouldn't let them use it, but beyond that, they said, oh, what it is you have a seal and a manatee swimming together. Well, they're all different sizes, all different shapes, all different colors. Oh, the manatee's tail was cut by the blades of it. And it gets more ridiculous all the time. But what you saw, 15 to 20 feet in length, 2 to 3 foot neck, and a head that is more like a seal, not like an alligator or a crocodile.
Yeah, it was a beautiful head. I can still, when I close my eyes, I can still see it.
Right.
And, it reminded you of the face of a seal. I'll say the face of a seal with the big, huge eyes.
Right. For lack of a better name, I have adopted one of the creature that was the food source. But for those who are listening, and you will have even experts talk about it now, but what you are seeing and what you're seeing along that arboreal belt from the British Isles, the Lake Champi, to Lake Champlain, out to Ogopogo with Naitaka, perhaps not the Cadborosaurus, but what everybody else is seeing is this creature that originated from the British Isles and still lives there. Now, it breathes there, but it's migratory. It'll go chasing the salmon, and it will find its way in and out, but it goes on land just as easily as in the water, so it doesn't have to consign itself to one or the other. But let me, I think what I'd like to do, if I can, with that, just kind of finish a couple little elements of my adventure down at the Altamaha River. The fellow who became Angus Finnegan in my book, really interesting guy named Bob Finley, read the novel and said, except for the first-person accounts of seeing the creature ourselves, everything you wrote about happened to us. And it did. I happened to be researching as well what happened to the Confederate gold when it was emptied out 3 days after the fall of the Confederacy, when they talked about Jefferson Davis turning upriver below Savannah. That's the Altamaha. General Sherman was going to burn his way to the sea, but didn't burn Savannah. People generally believe that he didn't burn it because of the beauty of the city. He didn't burn it because he was looking for a cemetery that contained the remains of Confederacy sympathizers called Copperheads from the north. And what I determined was when he turned up river, as it's described, it had to be up the Altamaha River. So we went up river, and we found a place, and it looked unusual. But the crux of the book happens to be that the Knights of the Golden Circle, those individuals rumored still to exist, who hid and guard the treasure of the Confederacy against the second rise of the South, still guarded to this day. We came across 3 individuals that looked like they'd never seen anything more than the shanty fronting the stagnant lake where they were living that had gotten filled in. And these people had little remnants of Confederate pallets and pinstripe, and I really can't explain it, but these people were very, very unusual, to say the least. But they described this lake to us. They said, well, there's some good fish in there. He said, especially up there near Bluegill Hill. But he said, you have to be careful. You throw your line, and you'll probably hook on some of the mausoleums and the tombstones there.
Right.
And that struck us as odd. He says, "You're going to be long?" No, we were trying to get out of there. The one guy was still suffering from having been shot in the head by the other and just couldn't speak. And the third person didn't have a tooth in her head. And we kind of got ourselves out of there. But the interesting thing about that, this is one other point real quick. I know we're coming on the half hour. Was that what the odd thing is, they were looking for what was called a Copperhead Cemetery. Now this hill, this Bluegill Hill that he was talking about, a bluegill is a type of crappie or bream fish, but another name for a bluegill is a copperhead.
Right.
And this man got us out of there, and if you've ever heard the stories of the Knights of the Golden Circle, they were the ones who guarded the Confederate treasure, and some say still guard it to this day.
Mm-hmm.
Dakota did an episode on it. Yep.
Right.
And so we got out of there, but that really happened to us, and just kind of a footnote to my story on Dick Rayner and also Dan Taylor. I went up to Hardyville, which is a small town, I guess near Hilton Head, but I found the warehouse where not only where the Nessa 2 was incomplete, but someone had bought the warehouse and was going to scrap them for iron. And I backed up to get a full picture of the Nessa 2, which was an impressive 40 to 45 foot long one-man sub, and I bumped into the trailer and turned around, and I have a picture of it, but the Viper fish was also sitting in it. That little submarine from 1969, I found it, and the man who bought the warehouse didn't think anything more of them than Man in the Moon. He said, well, if you can get them out of here, you can keep them. I didn't have the resources, so I contacted Dan Taylor's widow, who got in touch with the oceanographer who was working with him to try and get back over to Loch Ness to take the submarine, and she has them in mothballs in Atlanta. I'm trying right now to get them into Lauren Coleman's Cryptozoological Museum in Portland, Maine. That hasn't gone so well over the last 5 years, but it's kind of a sad footnote. But how determined would someone be if he was making up a story to spend $750,000 in the last 30 years of his life to build a ship that ultimately he was not able to ever put into the waters where the sighting originally occurred, that prompted him into such an obsession? And it was fascinating. It's in the book as well, but everything except first person is absolutely true of what happened to us in that third novel. It is more autobiographical than the other two put together.
Right. There's one thing about most people who are really researching something, when we go to meet them, and I always bring this story up, and it kind of drives it home, and that's why I use it. Not many people know that Vincent Price was a frustrated painter. He really wanted to be a painter, and he loved art. And what he would do was he would take some movie, in England, one of those movies, and he would take, his money and pick up a piece of art. Well, he invited the cast from one of those movies to his room for a wrap-up thing, and everybody was like, oh my God, we're going to Vincent Price's suite. And when they get there, this little tiny room in this dive and everything, and they're looking like, Vincent Price stays here. What did he do with all the money from the movie? And he opened a closet and brought out this incredible Rembrandt or something and said, wow, look what I've got. I don't know why, maybe because of TV and the way that show Ghostbusters made them filthy rich and everything. We expect people who are researchers to be filthy rich, to be running around with Porsches and that. But the reality is people who are really dedicated very rarely can afford to put dinner on the table the next night because a test tube is more important, and so I think people who really would meet researchers would be really shocked to find out how many of them are dirt poor. We have a question, but we're going to go to break, and we'll ask the question when we come back. About Bigfoot and the Abominable Man. The last song that we're going to do tonight is going to be Summer in the City, and I picked that because of the sweltering heat and all, the Loving Spoonful. I thought that would be a good song for tonight. So we're going to be right back with Dallas Tanner. We'll be wrapping up and talking about where you can find him and everything else, where you can find his books. Smoochie has already bought one of the Kindle books while she was listening tonight. So there you go there. We'll be right back. This is GameCon Radio, and we're rocking your world.
Let's do it.
You are listening to GameCon Radio.
You've got questions.
Who are we?
Where do we come from?
Are we alone in the universe?
Is there life after death?
Where can I take a class and really learn about demonology? Now, get the answers. For a decade, the American Institute of Metaphysics has offered the ultimate in courses designed to serve as the foundation in your search for life's questions. The courses cover a variety of subject areas and consist of wide-ranging alternative sciences, theories, and philosophies. Each course comes complete with textbooks, work materials, and instructions. The courses allow you the freedom to pursue your own areas of interest according to your schedule. Whether it's UFOs, life after death, demonology, cryptozoology, and more, you've got questions. We've got answers. Visit www.instituteofmetaphysics.com or call 877-623-3241 and start your search now.
Welcome back to Moebanshee's Lair, Visionary Talk Radio. If you guys have been enjoying the discussion here, you should hear it behind the commercials and all. You'd be flipping out. We have another question, and I want to talk to it. But first, tell them where they can find you. Your books are on Amazon, right?
Yeah, my books are pretty well available everywhere, but you can get the physical copies of the books basically through your local bookstore. They can order it. It's online, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and, of course, we're part of the digital age now, so you can get the Kindle versions. And a couple things about my books I always try to explain to people. I do try to educate as much as entertain. The novels are huge. They're very, very large, and I've gone in more than one editor, and I've got another set of editing that's going to go through, but basically, as I said, I feel like I'm a better researcher than I am an author when it comes to fiction. Mm-hmm. But everything in there happened to somebody, whether it happened to me or someone else. The third novel, Wake of the Lake Monster, is the most autobiographical because the only thing that didn't happen to me were the first-person sightings and, of course, the more destructive encounters that come toward the end of the book. But it's fun. I enjoy it, and I've got other novels I've written that are lined up and ready to be published, and but the novels are huge, and bless your heart if you can wade through them, and I hope you do learn something, and that you do like them, and that you let me know about it, let others know about it.
Yeah, and your site, it's on charter.net, right?
Yeah, you can go to dallastanner.com.
Okay.
And that will take you to it. I do have older sites out there, and people find them every now and again. But dallastanner.com will take you to the latest version of it. I have a lot of, presences on a lot of other cryptozoological sites because I've been at this for quite a while. But the one under my own name is the one that really talks about my research and about the books, and it's pretty much up to date. It doesn't contain a whole lot about my fifth novel, except one little blurb or story. But I didn't really forsake the cryptozoological fiction, but I wanted to take a break from it. But since I think we're still talking a bit about Bigfoot, you had a listener that had a question regarding it?
Yeah. It says you've talked and written about Bigfoot, but have you researched the abominable snowman? And that's coming out of England.
I did. I thought that was part of the whole mythos, the part of the lore. I learned about basically the legends about it and what it was portended to be, at least. How Edward Hillary thought, okay, we're the first people to, to ascend Mount Everest, and they find these footprints. And what I learned was that between the peaks in the Himalayas, you have these temperate areas where there are actually stretches of jungle. And I own several old volumes that described the abominable snowman, as it's called, or the Yeti. And I believe the Sherpas, this term translates not as abominable. I think it's like with Bigfoot. The press came up with the name of it, the newspapers. But Yeti to the Sherpas means that over there, and that's all it is. They don't know what to call it, but it is a smaller. I almost hesitate to call it a bipedal creature. It'll walk on fours as much as like a pungent, like a knuckle walker. We had the what was called the Gigantopithecus that supposedly traveled across the Bering Strait and when there was a land bridge and became what they believed to be Bigfoot. But what I believe the abominable snowman to be, I do believe it's a real creature, but I do believe it is probably a type of indigenous ape-like creature that uses the mountain passes to go between these temperate jungle zones that actually happen to be there. And I think there's a little more mundane or earthly explanation for it. Of course, the whole story about the scalp in the monastery and the finger bones and everything. The finger bones were actually human. The sagittal crest or the hair and skin was actually from a yak. It doesn't diminish the actuality of this creature that could possibly live, but I do believe that it really has more to do with something not really mundane as an undiscovered primate that lives in those temperate areas, in those jungle zones, and just uses the mountain passes to go between them.
You were talking about pieces of skin. You obviously have heard about the story where Jimmy Stewart, his wife, snuck back that one finger to England, and that explorer, that adventurer back in the 50s, and it turned out they finally just did the DNA, and it turns out it's a human finger.
Right. And there's quite a bit of that. The problem that you run into now, I've got some interesting things that have been sent to me. One lady lifted using clear moving packing tape, lifted a fingerprint off of her window when she opened her windows, or the blinds in her bedroom one night. The street lamp was completely blocked and blacked out, 8 feet off the ground and about 6 feet wide by something. And the next day she found this fingerprint, and she put this clear packing tape and covered it with another piece and sent it to me. That finger had to have been all of 8 inches long, and it had to have been the index finger. But you do run into situations where people have evidence, and yet all they say is, well, it's not any known creature, so it's inconclusive. We can't really identify it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I saw some tracks that someone brought to me, plaster casts, that looked to be about like mine. I wear about a size 10 wide, and it was no bigger. I said, well, that's not a very big creature at all. I said, well, that's a juvenile. And then they showed me other tracks. And the last one, lady said, you're going to have to bring this out for me because I can't lift it. And this is something that it was a track that was cast. But the interesting thing about this was it was so big that when they cast it in plaster, it broke under its own weight, and they had to recast it in resin. This thing was a footprint, and it had the dermal ridges and even evidence of scarring. It had that kind of bony outcropping on the outstep of the foot. But the track itself was a little over 2 feet long and about 18 inches wide, and it had sunk. The original imprint had sunk 4 inches into the ground.
Wow.
And probably an individual, a Bigfoot as it was described, 12 to 14 feet in height, and probably the one that blocked out this woman's window.
Mm.
And I do get a lot of stories and talk to people, but when they follow it up with images, like video footage, things like that, and I put these people in touch with each other if they've seen what they believe to be a lake monster or a Bigfoot or chupacabra or ghosts or whatever happens to be, because these people are good support for one another. But again, not breaking confidences. These people who experience them literally across generations if they do nothing to, I guess for lack of a better term, rat them out and let people know where they are. And it's true all over. You can call them myths and legends, and that keeps them safe. And I think that's why shamanistic communities never say any more than they do about these, like the Makola Mbembe, the pygmies will talk about these creatures, but they're not going out looking for anybody to invade their homeland in the Cameroon just to be able to give away their way of life. And that's what would have happened with the altamaha-ha, as it almost happened with Bishop Bill. What they saw 2 years ago, that was no dog. And that dog did not kill the livestock or the animals that disappeared. But there you have it. It's just myths and legends to us, and as long as it remains that way, there are people that can go on with their lives otherwise as ordinarily as we do.
Right. You wrote a book, and it features a story about the Shroud of Turin, right?
Yes.
I had Barry Schwartz on my show in May, and he was one of the 1970 dream team that took the shroud down and tested it. So what did you find out in your research about this shroud?
Well, I found out a couple of interesting things about it. What we're talking about is, of course, the burial cloth that was purchased by Joseph of Arimathea to cover the body of Christ. Right. Now, the interesting thing about that is that it was a relic that was fought over and paraded around by the House of Savoy until they decided in Clarion Lyre that they were going to essentially rebuild the reliquary and the relic holding place in that chapel. But it was falling apart. You could still see the image clearly, according to eyewitness accounts. But 2 years into that refurbishment, they put the shroud on display again. All of a sudden, it's in great physical condition, but you can't see the image upon it with the naked eye anymore. Mm-hmm. Now, if you look at pictures of it, like to go to Google Images, every picture you see of Christ on the Shroud of Turin is a negative. It's a reverse of what's actually there, because when you see pictures of the shroud, there are stains on it in kind of a Rorschach pattern stretching across this 14-foot long cloth. But in late 1898, there was a man named Pia Secunda. At this point, the church did not own the shroud, or the sinden, as it's called. The House of Savoy owned it. They traded a castle for it. But what happened was he took a picture, and Pia Secunda looked at it and said, "You know what?" He said he was having trouble seeing the image on it. The only way he could see it is if he reversed and turned the image into a negative. He said, "This is a photographic positive." He said, "What I'm looking at is a primitive photograph," and he was censured for that. But Secunda Pia was a photographer. He understood the concept, and what he essentially was telling the individuals, the people who wanted this picture taken, was, this is a 500-year-old primitive photograph. Mm. And so what I did with my novel, in order to fictionalize it, is that, there were actually two witnesses to what happened in that cave donated by Joseph of Arimathea. You had what was called the sinden, but you also had something called the sedarium. The sedarium is the cloth that was wrapped around the head of Christ to spare the mourners and also to cover the bleeding of his face from the crown of thorns when he was taken down from the cross. And it describes in the scriptures how these two cloths were neatly folded. Now, even though the shroud was much traveled and was also called the cloth of Edessa, and was brought back, I believe, as part of the Holy Grail by the Templar Knights. Forget Dan Brown. None of that actually happened. But what they described...
You can't tell anybody that.
Oh, I know. But what happened there, I did the research on that. There was a man who was crazy as a loon in the 1950s who put a false history of the Merovingian kings with himself as the last descendant and stole it into and placed it in the archives in France, National Archives, and that's where all that came from. But in the Book of Philip, where I got a lot of my information, you know, we last hear of Joseph of Arimathea, who is actually a cousin to Christ and also related to Nicodemus. They were Sadducees and Pharisees, a judge and lawyer in the court of Israel in Jerusalem. He steals away with some of what they called the 70 to travel abroad, to get away, because the last we hear of him in the book of Acts is he is in jail. He said he only took 3 items with him. He took the cup used at the Last Supper and 2 vessels. One had held the blood of Christ, one had held the body of Christ. Now, the Sinden was passed back and forth between what they called the infidels and the Christians, and it wasn't necessarily fought over. The relic of the shroud was hidden in a wall in Edessa and only uncovered when the first one of the first crusades knocked down a portion of that wall, and it was brought back to Lair in France by the Templar Knights. And they defended that for 125 years. That's fact. Now, the other thing was the Sudarium is in Oviedo, Spain. The face cloth never left except one time out of Oviedo when it was put in what was called the Mountain of the Kings under protection when the Moors, for a time, occupied for about a century, that area near Toledo in Spain. But there had been testing done where there were 70 points of articulation between the face on the Sinden and the face, with the serum and the blood and the features imprinted upon it that said, these did come from one another. The two together are called the Athonia. Both have miracles attested to them. And by church decree, in 1983, the House of Savoy used relics the way all the royalty did in order to gain followers.
Right.
When they came into ownership in the 12th century of that cloth, they maintained ownership until the 1940s. King Umberto abdicated the throne. He was the last of the House of Savoy because he had supported Mussolini in World War II, and the Republic of Italy came into being when the monarchy fell.
Mm-hmm.
So from 1983, when the church got it to this day, they venerate this cloth. But what I honestly and truly believe is, someone was given the opportunity to try and come up with a copy. There were 40 to 50 copies of the shroud made so that other people would say, see, this is what it looks like.
Right.
But I believe that someone very famous in the last days of the 15th century actually is responsible for a photographic recreation of the shroud. And the method I described, later someone actually did and said, this is how I accomplished it. Mm-hmm. And my book, it's 240,000 words. Yes, it's huge. And yes, I'm probably better at educating than I am entertaining. But I do believe that this accounts for the fact that I think that is a photographic reproduction of the shroud. The true shroud exists, but it is kept under wraps, so to speak, in a place where the two pieces can never be reunited, because I believe that the Sudarium and the Sinden brought together, the Athonia, are the one and true Holy Grail and the only artifact that, in keeping them separate, the Templar Knights ever were accounted for as having had responsibility with. For 125 years, they controlled the shroud.
Right. This has been fascinating. Your books, let's go down the list. If you tell them the names of the books, you can find them at bookstores, you can order them, you can get them online. Some of them are Kindled, right? You can download a Kindle type thing, which, again, I am so low tech, I wasn't able to do it. But The Shadow of the Thunderbirds, right? And The Track of Bigfoot, and the which there's The Wake of the Lake Monster. They're the 3 cryptids trilogy.
They are.
And then the Chupacabra is a novella. And you've got the Shroud book, right?
I do.
I can't bring that up. I'm looking for it, but I don't see it.
No, it's okay. I do have a fifth novel.
Okay.
And just a quick story on that. It's a novel about who really wrote the works of Shakespeare, which has fascinated me for a long time, and I do believe that I have concrete evidence, only because there's a book and a painting that absolutely point to one another as to who it is. But the interesting thing about that is I wrote this novel, then I found out that the folks who put out Independence Day and Godzilla and Day After Tomorrow and 2012 were putting out a book or a movie on the same subject called Anonymous, and I thought, oh no, I got to get my book out, or they think I'm copying them. And then when I learned that the track they were going to go down, I said, oh, this is not going to work out. I don't even want my book associated with this. So I was waiting for them to put their movie out, and they realized that they couldn't take this tack either. And I didn't put my book out, didn't put it out, and then eventually, a few months back, in what we call Walmart, I'm sure you got it in England and all over the world, that movie went straight to video because of the horrible approach that they took. So my book is going to editing over the next month or so. But again, I consider myself a great researcher, but I'm definitely not the best writer, and somebody should stop me from writing 200,000 words or more, but I get impassioned about this stuff. But I honestly and truly believe that I have the incontrovertible evidence for who wrote the works of Shakespeare, and people would be absolutely surprised. But it does take place in North Wales, and it also incorporates some of the elements of the Arthurian legends. And I love this stuff. We were talking offline, over the break one time. I'm German on both sides of my family, but I love anything that has to do with the British Isles, and I spent time going to Loch Ness, didn't find anything myself. But if you get a chance and you like the book, or if there's something you don't like, just let me know. If there's something you disagree with, you're going to learn something about the Templars. It's going to make you want to throw the book down, but I can pass you the proof on it. But the Templar Knights are actually the first buccaneers and pirates. And it's factual. You won't like it, but it's the truth, like everything else in the book. And I hope you've enjoyed this couple of hours. I've had a blast, and I do appreciate you bringing me on, Mo.
Thank you. This was really good. And as I said, the show will be up on YouTube. We have to take the music out, guys, because YouTube doesn't want any problems. But it'll also be on Podomatic, so you can download it with the music if you guys want. I want to just thank you so much for coming on, and tell everybody next week we're going to have another author on, Jeff Mudgett, Mudgett, and his book is called Bloodstains. And what it turns out is there was a man called Herman Webster Mudgett, a.k.a. H.H. Holmes, and he's believed to be America's first serial murderer and a prolific mass murderer. And as it turns out, he turned out to be Jeff Mudgett's ancestor. And when he found out who this guy was, he started researching and found out a lot about this cold-blooded killer and his borderline personality disorder. He really dove into this, and this was an incredible chamber of horrors, they called this guy's house. So I can't wait to have him on. I think it's going to be a great show. I want to thank everybody for listening in, and as I said, if you go to Dallas Turner, if you Google it, you can find him on charter.net and dallasturner.com and Amazon. You can find his books. They all look outstanding. I've read bits and pieces of all of them to prepare for tonight. I really enjoyed this, Dallas. Thank you so much.
You're quite welcome. I do love this stuff, and there's if we ever get a chance and you want to bring me back on again, I've also got an interesting story about a set of photographs that fell into my lap that have confused and bewildered experts in not only the paranormal but also in the field of photography. So if we get a chance at some point, you're looking for someone just to fill a little bit of time, feel free to call on me anytime. I'm always available.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much, and God bless you, and you be safe out there. Don't take no chances, okay? And with that, I want to wish everybody a good evening. Please, be cool. Don't do anything strange. It's really hot. We've got some really severe weather moving through. Everybody thanks you for coming on, and they're also saying bring them back on, Mo. So everybody enjoyed this show tonight. Everybody had a good time. So with that, I'm going to say good night. We'll see you next week. God bless you all. Please stay safe. I love you all. Good night.
Somewhere over the rainbow, birds fly. Birds fly over the rainbow, while can't.
Thank you for visiting me at my lair. Moebanshee's Lair is broadcast live on Tuesday evenings at 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Mountain, 7 p.m. Pacific, and in the UK, 3 a.m. Wednesday mornings on www.gameconradio.com. You can listen to our recent recordings on Podomatic/Moebanshee. You can contact me at www.asylumsgate.com. Again, thank you for listening. God bless you and yours, and have a very cool day.